Hi, my name is Phil. I like talking about politics. And in this video, I'd like to share my views on an opinion piece in the article in The Guardian, which raised the prospect of another Trump presidency, forcing Labour to take a much closer line with our EU relationships. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So I've often wondered about how a Labour government would deal with a Trump presidency. This week, I wasn't the only one. An opinion piece in The Guardian broached the subject with a trail that led to closer EU relationships. In fact, more specifically, being able to attack Brexit more. And before I go over the general thrust and how I agree with the rationale, but not quite the final conclusion, as well as why this suddenly became much more important this week, let me go over my general thoughts on the difficulties of a Trump president for UK relations. So the first is to note that we obviously can't just ignore America for a few years. The USA is very much a linchpin of basically every bit of connectivity around the world. The irony is that the only people in the UK who think we could actually just isolate ourselves from the world and go it alone are the hardened Brexit supporters, and those people actually would embrace the orange one. If Trump became president, the challenge for the UK, along with other countries, would be immense. And the challenge for Starmer as Prime Minister could well be all-encompassing. Impossible to work with Trump. Impossible to just have nothing to do with him. So he would need to forge a path which tried to make the best out of a chaotic geopolitical situation, inevitably meaning that Europe would need to urgently work together and the UK would have to be right in the middle of that cooperation. But it would not just be challenging in terms of deciding the right courses of action and getting agreement with various countries. Starmer would also be faced with an opposition Conservative Party on Trump's side. It's not like the UK would have a clear position and just needed to get international agreements. You know, the first issue, of course, is going to be security. Trump has promised to remove all aid from Ukraine and basically pull out of NATO. Now, whether he would be able to do exactly what he's promising, I don't know, but it's clear that he would have the power and motivation to fatally undermine Ukraine's defence and give the green light to Russia to finish the job. Catastrophic for Europe, needless to say, and the UK, if led by a remotely credible government, would have no choice but to work with the rest of Europe to counter the new and way more dangerous threat. Because if Trump can abandon Ukraine, he can also abandon other countries, even those bordering Russia who have been joining the NATO family much recently. They'll be much less secure if the USA refuses to play its part in their defence. You know, I've said for a while, you know, we have become too reliant in Europe upon American military support. We should have been doing more ourselves. But now we have a potential American president who openly says he doesn't care about Europe. In fact, if Starmer becomes Prime Minister this May, I don't think he can wait for November. I would argue that it would be irresponsible for European countries not to prepare for the worst case scenario of a Trump presidency where the orange one has the power to block all US military activities in Europe from as soon as next January. You know, some think that the inevitable chain of events that would unfold would end up destroying Trump's regime because then there'd be an economic firestorm that would hit America. Maybe, but by then it'll be too late, won't it? The second challenge would be trade and securing trade. Now, coping with a shaky global economy with Trump randomly ramping up tariffs on imports almost indiscriminately, you know, there's reason to believe that Trump would be completely unhinged and kickstart a global trade war. This would hit Western supply chains and the Kremlin would be designing a special commemorative medal for Trump's services to their cause. And without going into these details, Raphael Behr in The Guardian is arguing that a Trump presidency means that Starmer would be forced to acknowledge the folly of Brexit, as he puts it. Now, here I think he's right and wrong in sort of equal measure. It would obviously mean tilting much more to the EU than the USA and much more quickly. But then this is already a done deal, whether the orange one wins or not. David Lammy has said the next Labour government will have EU relations as their top priority. Now, when he said this, quite a while ago now, last year, I remarked at the time, I did a video at the time, there's a lot of people not treating that statement with the gravity it deserves. It was an explicit intention to change generations of foreign policy whereby we prioritise US relations. So even without a Trump presidency, the next UK government is going to be prioritising closer EU relations. In terms of security and trade, it's clear that Starmer and Lammy will be pushing for much closer ties. And this is because we need closer trading ties with the EU, regardless of anything else going on in the world, in order to boost a flagging economy. I mean, these standards controls, the government are still chopping and changing the timeline for these standards controls coming in this year. Why? Because it's going to hurt our trade. So, of course, Labour are going to need to deal with that on a more permanent basis, not just keep putting things off. Labour know this. Starmer and Lammy know this. They're two of the most prominent Remainers. They certainly know it. But we have little leverage in isolated trade talks. So we're intending to have security cooperation talks running alongside them. Something the EU's not keen on, but that is because security is where we do have leverage. It's one area where even Brexit Britain has something of major value to the wider European family. And all of this is without a Trump presidency. In fact, if I turn this idea of Trump forcing the UK to want to work much more closely with the EU on its head, I could argue it would also motivate EU countries to want to do likewise, because it will be in our common interest to do so. And because Trump, if he does win power again, will likely waste no time in dismantling European defence structures, there will be an urgency about the moves as well. So when Bear says that a Trump presidency will force Starmer to want to smash down Brexit structures, I would say instead, not so much force him, it will give him the opportunity to do so more quickly. Saying it will force Starmer to act in a particular way is to suggest that he doesn't really want to do it. But as I've said before, the most senior members of the Labour leadership now were explicitly against Brexit before we left the EU. They all individually really pushed very hard to avoid it. Impossible to say that Starmer did not go the extra mile to try and avoid it. The idea that all of these people, Starmy, Lammy, people like that, Starmer, I'm not made up a nickname for him there, Starmer and Lammy and all those people. The idea that they all suddenly got kicked in the head by a horse at exactly the same time, just after we'd left the EU, and therefore the strategy had to change, and at a point where they were working out how to turn around the worst election defeat in modern history. The idea that they suddenly became born-again Brexiteers is ridiculous. They're not. They're politicians who want to win power and they need people on their side. So in terms of changing attitudes, I would see a Trump presidency as changing the attitudes of the public in a way which Starmer and others in Labour can use to justify more open talk about Brexit. A frank discussion which is still being suppressed in much of the mainstream media. But, you know, may not have quite the same urgency if the worst doesn't happen in America. You know, we'll have to see what the next year unfolds. And the orange one was spelling out just how dire the prospect of his presidency would be this week. This is what's brought it a bit of urgency. So Donald Trump has released a video setting out what he was going to do to dismantle what he calls the deep state upon becoming president next year. Now, for anyone who knows not just the rough history of 1930s Europe, not like, oh yeah, Hitler came to power, burned down the Reichstag, took over and then started a war. For people who know exactly what Hitler did when he became Chancellor, in those first few months of becoming Chancellor, the exact moves he made, for those who are familiar with those, if you watch this video of Trump, you'll go, oh, that's exactly the same. Oh dear. Oh dear me. Now, just because Trump says he wants to do those things doesn't mean everything would go to plan. I mean, he is an idiot. And who knows, maybe there will be a reaction in America to stop the more extreme, policies he has. Maybe Congress won't go along with it. I also think there's good reason to believe that Trump will not win the presidential election this year. Apart from anything else, him spelling out his intentions to dismantle America and reform it in his own image, that should urge voters to turn out for Biden this autumn. But until the election is over and the dust has settled, we cannot be sure of anything. There is a possibility that Trump will win the presidency, that he will implement his manifesto of spiteful revenge and set America up as a fully fledged dictatorship. Not only a disaster for America, but as Trump is in the pocket of powerful dictators around the world, it would also throw geopolitics completely out of balance. And that balance is already unstable enough right now. And it would absolutely force all of Europe to realise that it would likely trigger major global instability, which will need urgent cooperation amongst all Western nations. And Europe, including the UK, will need to be right at the heart of that. Not that we should wish for a Trump presidency to speed up our evaluation of Brexit. It would cause way more damage than even this extreme Tory Brexit is going to cause, and this extreme Tory Brexit is going to be wound down under Labour come what may. Besides, as I say, there is little need for this. Labour have made it abundantly clear that they want to quietly work towards closer cooperation with the EU on everything. Their red lines do not cover any particular aspects. Their red lines are purely anything which plunges the country into civil war again. So that's why their red lines are EU membership, single market, customs union, because all of those things trigger a political row which voters are at the moment put off. So to move those red lines, or preferably rub them out altogether, what's needed is not a tin pot dictator from New York. It's just conversations with people. Change people's attitudes and politicians will have to follow if they want to get elected. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.